Once again, it's time to make some Matchbox Thomas characters. I'm sure you know the drill by now. Using the 1970s and 1980s Matchbox trains as a blueprint, I model a selection of Thomas and Friends characters as if Matchbox had produced a toy line for the franchise back in the 1980s. Today, we're rounding off the 1980s by modelling the way for the characters that might have been introduced to the range in 1989. With that, it's time we began. During this point in the timeline, Season 3 is still a long way off. Production on the season wouldn't have even begun, and so as far as the toy designers were concerned, they would have to keep padding out new releases until a third season of Thomas was eventually announced, assuming it ever was. With the hindsight that we now have, I want to pad out the releases of Season 2 newbies in the Matchbox range up until at least 1990, most likely 1991, and then toys based on the Season 3 newbies can go on sale in 1992. At this point, the easiest way to do this will probably be to release a new engine, a new non-rail vehicle, and some assorted rolling stock each wave. Obviously, it would be extremely stingy to release Bill one year and Ben the next, so they're part of the same wave. If you're familiar with the earlier videos in the series, you'll know that one big difference between the Ertl range and my hypothetical Matchbox Thomas range is that there are a lot of shared chassis between engines and rolling stock in the Matchbox range, with virtually no chassis being unique to a single rail vehicle. As such, Bill and Ben are using Percy's chassis, which in turn comes from the Matchbox 040 tank. This has a longer wheelbase than Bill and Ben do in the TV series, and so there will be some differences in Bill and Ben's appearance in order to account for this. This is perhaps most notable when it comes to the cab, which is slightly shorter in relation to the saddle tank as compared to the TV series design. But I don't think it's too noticeable, and it's not as if the merchandise for the show at the time was 100% accurate to the TV series all the time. Similar to the Ertl Thomas range, my idea is that, as the Matchbox range continues to sell and grow, more painted detail can be afforded for new releases. As such, Bill and Ben's whistles are painted gold, and their water filler caps are painted black. Once the general shape was modelled, I added the brown rectangles that adorn the sides and back of the cab, which I assume are doors of some description, but look for all the world like giant bars of chocolate, especially when separate from the cab. Once that was done, it was time to texture Bill /Ben. After a bit of trial and error, the textures more or less look like how I wanted them to look. Bill and Ben have a handrail directly above the SCC lettering on the sides of their saddle tank, and so I added a handrail, leaving it the same yellow as the main body to make it look like it's part of the same mould. After that, it was simply a case of adding a face and the main model was complete. After cloning the base model and making a new texture for the nameplate, I had both Bill and Ben to play with, and with that, it was time to move on to the next release. This was a very quick one. I had already made a troublesome truck in the previous Matchbox video, and the van shared a lot of its parts. For more information, you can watch the previous video in the Matchbox Thomas and Friends series. There will be a playlist in the description. I added a roof, and then raised the sides of the truck to meet the bottom of the roof. The ends of the truck, now a van, were modified accordingly. I also retained a play feature present on the troublesome truck. The previous part in the series provides more context, but I gave the troublesome truck a door that can open and close, in keeping with the goods wagons in the non-Thomas Matchbox range having play features. The van also has this feature, allowing you to store small things inside. Not much more was left to do after that. After modifying the plank detail, the time soon came to add an appropriate face. It only made sense to use the laughing face associated with the Linton and Barnstaple style vans, which in itself was based on the John Kenny illustrations. In his illustrations, the trucks and vans have embedded faces, but as the TV series truck and van models were off-the-shelf kits, it makes sense that the faces were separately moulded. By this point in the Matchbox Thomas range, express coaches were perhaps something of a glaring omission. The non-Thomas range did have coaches of its own, true, but they're not exactly worthy of an express train. Of course, in real life, some Thomas ranges just never bothered with express coaches, or indeed any coaches that weren't just Annie and Clarabelle. In my opinion, this was one of the biggest flaws with Take-Along. Gordon doesn't have anything to pull in the range. Ertl took 10 years to introduce express coaches into their range, and whilst Tommy introduced an express coach for Gordon early on, I was never too keen on the fact that he only came with one, meaning that if you wanted more than one express coach you'd need to buy another Gordon. My thinking is that the Matchbox Express coaches would be released as a 2-pack, similar to the Ertl and later Wooden Railway versions. I think it's possible that they may have released a pack that bundles the express coaches with Gordon. Maybe also a pack featuring either James or Henry with an exclusive set of red express coaches. Another thing you'll notice, especially after what I said about chassis during the Bill and Ben segment, is that the coach has a bespoke chassis to call its own. If you remember my earlier attempt at making Matchbox Express coaches back in 2021, you might remember that they just used the standard 4-wheel coach chassis. With the Matchbox Gordon being as long as he is, I thought that coaches of this size would look a bit awkward being pulled by him, and so I decided to give him something a bit more substantial in appearance. It goes with what I said earlier about the Matchbox range getting more ambitious as the Thomas range continues to sell, I suppose. The same chassis can almost certainly find some use for characters in future waves. In order to negotiate the curves of the Matchbox track system, I've decided to give the coaches pivoting bogies. The chassis block in the middle prevents the bogies from turning beyond a certain point, allowing them to still be played with on the floor as die-cast toys often are. Giving the coach windows was a fairly straightforward process, which basically just involved creating a bunch of cuboids and then using the Boolean effect to cut those shapes out of the sides of the coach. In keeping with the coaches from the show, the windows are different on either side. After creating the windows for the composite coach, I came to the realisation that the brake coach would require fewer windows. But this was nothing that the Boolean tool and extending the mesh couldn't fix. After giving the coaches some window glazing, they were complete, and it was time to move on to the next and final toy in the fifth wave. Finally, it's time for a road vehicle. We've got Bertie and Terence from previous waves, and now it's time to model Trevor. Perhaps rather foolishly, I went in expecting Trevor to be easy, but he wasn't. He isn't rectangular like the other road vehicles so far, but he still requires pretty much everything to be newly modelled. I brought Edward into the scene as a size reference, although I did manage to modify his smokebox and boiler to use with Trevor. Whereas most of the engines have plastic smokeboxes and funnels, my Matchbox Trevor model is partially based on a toy traction engine that Matchbox put out in the 1950s, which features a metal smokebox with a bespoke chimney that is a close match for Trevor's. The toy smokebox and funnel are unpainted, but if Matchbox made Trevor for their Thomas range, it goes without saying that these parts would have to be coloured black to match the livery of the character in the show. As with the other road vehicles I've already modelled in the Matchbox range, Trevor's design is asymmetrical. A lot of the shapes required to make Trevor were fairly non-standard, and required a lot of going back and forth looking at the reference sheets and then my model again to make sure I was getting the shapes of these components correct. Compared to his model in the show, the livery on the Matchbox Trevor was simplified a fair amount. Having said that, the UV mapping required a fair amount of tedious manual editing, even if the texturing process itself was quite simple. Once the textures were implemented onto the model, it was time to add a face, and with that, all of Wave 5 of the Matchbox Thomas range is complete. All that's left now is to look at the proper renders of the fictional toys. And there you have it, another wave of the Matchbox Thomas range. There aren't too many characters from the first two seasons left to model in the range, and so I may merge the next two waves of Matchbox releases into one video, although given what the numbers for the next two waves will be, I might just call the video Part 6. I can't say when that video will be released, but hopefully you'll enjoy it, just like you've hopefully enjoyed this video. But that's all we've got time for today, so I will see you next time.